Together we put together a project that was funded eventually by the Open Society that involved the African Association of Universities through the Research and Education Networking Unit, our university, and the funder became the Open Society Institute in West Africa. We really wanted to look at administrators, teachers, some decision makers, and in West African institutions that could think about how they might wish to use social networking technologies and how they could really transform teaching and learning. And we really linked that with very much the mission of Open Society. The Open Society Association had done some really interesting work around AfricanElections.com and looking at how social networking could predict election results. So they were looking at informal predictors and the relationship of informal predictors to creation of a more democratic civil society. So what we wanted to do was to find ways that we collectively could think about transforming some of the teaching and learning environment within both our institutions and the multiple institutions in West Africa, with the end that as students may be engaged in different ways and non-hierarchical ways, that this would have an eventual result as in the qualities of a graduate. The qualities of a graduate could think more critically about their environment, that would look beyond some of the discussions just within the classrooms and networking beyond. I think one of the other things that we really noticed was that, and I think Emma attested to that we had 6 individuals who wanted to attend, and the opportunities for people just travel, despite the fact that we talk about living in a very globalized world in which we really have free movement. That was an issue that we really faced, and the opportunities for anybody to participate or be within a global discussion was often online only. And I think this kind of reflects some of the work that George and I were involved in before in the West Bank and their move to sort of create an opportunity for a couple of classrooms, because mobility becomes a huge issue. And it was very interesting as they moved from the model of the OUUK in sort of 1979, where they had just print-based, and moved to actually having, using Illuminate, using some tools. How could we actually interact with faculty members? So the process, we began with a 2-day workshop, and we were hoping that this group of faculty and administrators would become the incubation unit. We quickly realized that despite the fact that the initial workshop was in English, we really needed to have a bilingual presence. And as good Canadians who aren't very bilingual, we negotiated with an individual that was quite fluent, and so we ended up doing a mirrored course in which we attracted people, and website reference resources eventually, because as all sort of projects have to have a tangible outcome, we really had the outcome is to be sort of a redesign of a learning activity, and then eventually sustainability of a website and network. And I think the interesting thing that we were able to do, and again, coming from a very traditional university where we can really never tell faculty what to do, fortunately George and the other individuals teaching agreed to make this an experiment in open teaching, which led to some very interesting results. The idea was open teaching. We thought from our discussions with African Association of Universities, we'd have a lot of participants from African universities. We ended up with a lot of participants from around the world. So that was also quite interesting.
And I'll just talk a little bit about the guiding theory, which, given some of the things that I spoke of this morning and that other colleagues spoke about, I think you have some awareness of, but largely the mindset was to duplicate some of the attributes that we tried to include in designing CCK 08 and 09. My view at least is that when you learn transparently, you become a teacher, because you teach those who observe, you teach those who are attending to your own learning. And that means that people are at different levels, right? So one student who's quite advanced will likely either start to teach or mentor others who aren't as advanced. It's back to that old, one schoolhouse model. I'm not sure, used to have this in Canada, at least, southern Manitoba. I remember we saw a place we took on field trips to see these schools, and you would have everybody from grade 6 down to kindergarten. And you actually, there's studies that have been done that talk about the value of these systems, because what you have is learners becoming teachers as they develop in their competence. And it's a very effective learning model. So when you learn transparently, what you're really doing is you're turning the internet into a schoolhouse, because you're allowing those who've mastered the concepts to begin to mentor others or teach others who are still developing at a different stage. So we really wanted to emphasize a social, connected, pedagogical model, also known as connectivism. One of the difficulties that we face, and we'll talk a little bit, and Kathleen and I will talk about some of the challenges that we encountered, but we have a goal, at least, of learner autonomy, and I don't know, at this point, I would say the approach wasn't as successful as I had hoped. When we started the course, it was Dave Cormier from University of Prince Edward Island. It was the French instructor in the course, and we've taught several English courses together. And so we started out wanting intentionally, and it was what we told the students is, we are familiar with educational technologies. I mean, that's our lives. This is what we do each day, spend time online, interacting, communicating, sharing. But we recognize that the African context is one that we cannot wholesale import our views into. And so we intentionally tried to pull back as educators in the course so that our particular views and perspectives weren't dominant in their expression. And what we told the students was, the byproduct here is we are learners about the context of your region of Africa. By the way, one thing, it's just a random point that bugs me sometimes, and I do it all the time myself. Africa is the only place of the world that I treat as one big entity, right? It's like I'm saying, the Western world to include all these individual countries. So I don't know why I do that, but anyway. So what ended up happening was we wanted to emphasize learner autonomy and self-efficacy. We were going to teach them about learning technologies as we understood it. We were asking them to teach us about their context within their particular country or region of a country. Strongly emphasized learner direction, right? They choose, we put resources, we made resources available. We were very aware of bandwidth limitations. We had done a bit of work in Africa in the past, either through projects or through traveling. So we were aware of some of the unique elements, and we were very conscious of not importing what you would look at as a Western view of curriculum and dropping that into an African context. The courses, the way they're set up, we used Wikiversity. We initially thought, should we use University of Manitoba? We have a media wiki site set up as well. And so we decided, no, we would go with Wikiversity for the sake of supporting Wikiversity, which is a great project, but also so if for any reason we didn't have our site available, there was still a copy of it. And basically it's set up with, as you can see, the introduction, the general objectives. Gotta love those objectives, and a bit of talk facilitator-wise. And then we mentioned the course structure. Typically, when we've taught CCK 08 and 09, we've gone with a complexity model, which is throw so much stuff at you that you have to cry uncle and accept that you cannot manage everything, and then begin to network so you can break out of that code of structured content. We were cautious of that here, recognizing that in certain instances that mindset of needing a certain degree of guidance seems to still be somewhat prominent from what we were told with Barry Boubacar, the African representative from the Association of African Universities. And but we mentioned it was an open course. There's a Moodle area that's set up. We send out regular discussions or via email. We have two versions. There's the French version, which launches just to the French wiki page and the contents within that, and then of course it links to the Moodle site. So that in a nutshell is the course. Nothing revolutionary there. The main thing we applied was openness to the process.
The more interesting thing was that the participant profile was there was only 4 individuals from the original sort of incubation group that have become active and active participants. And then we thought, we looked at the statistics and, is participation necessarily within their context, sharing and debating ideas? And we were talking about this earlier, and maybe this whole idea of transforming teaching, is that what we want to do, and is that our agenda, or is it the agenda within the participants' universities?
I mean, there was certainly the profile we found that we had more participation from non-African learners. Then we had a gentleman, believe he was from Nigeria.
Yeah, Jos University.
Okay.
Who has participated.
And so we've had a few different individuals who've joined. There's one individual who's doing some work with Athabasca University, and he asked in our group, because it's a group of educators in Africa, can they join? And I said, well, absolutely, it's an open course. We want anyone to join. And so we found a very interesting dichotomy between when we met face-to-face in Dakar, and we spent 2 days, intensive days with this group. My luggage didn't come, so I had to go street shopping and found a lovely outfit, so you should see my nice white shoes. And experience was very positive, high level of engagement, active involvement, active contributions, critiquing, sharing their context, the experience that they faced. And then we moved online and we lost all of that. At least we think we did. Maybe they're having wonderful, engaging conversations without us. I don't know.
Yeah, and what we've essentially done, and I guess it becomes an ethical question, is that we've essentially taken funding from West Africa and developed an open teaching course that is populated by everybody except West Africans. Interesting idea, I mean, and I remember reading an article that the president of Alamea University in Ethiopia had written, and he's an agricultural economist, and he talked about how much of the Ethiopian GNP had been spent on educating faculty members in North America and the UK. So that was a real ethical question. So how do we, is this engagement relative, or is it our agenda, or is it their agenda?
Ultimately, we are saying there's a few things that are at stake here. One, we have a pedagogical failure, right? The model that we selected for engaging with these students was the inappropriate model. Two, there's brilliant, incredible learning happening that we're just not aware of, which we couldn't even comment on, right? That which you can't comment on. Anyway, so and then there's the final point, which is, that perhaps we have an issue of learner development, right? Like, is this a concern where there needs to be an intermediate stage of development? Is this a group of students, as Kathleen mentioned, who feel uncomfortable posting on a wiki or correcting and editing a change that a dean has made, or commenting on a dean's blog post and saying, oh, I disagree with that? Is that a cultural issue that exists here? So to what degree is self-efficacy being hampered? Because you need a degree of self-efficacy to be an active participant in network learning. By very nature, it requires engagement and participation. And so our question is the system or the culture hampering self-efficacy, or is it our pedagogical model that's at fault?
I'm going to really start off talking about this online facilitation course in a way that gets behind some of the text in the presentation, because the text in the presentation is partly the way we project ourselves to the world, but there's a little bit of text behind the text about what it is that drove us, as well as the things that are said here. So to start off, really, the question was, why an online facilitation course? Why was this needed? Who was it for? What is it about? And there's a very clear context that even in universities in Africa, where there are problems like electricity and connectivity, there is an aspiration to have online presence and the capacity to run and use online learning environments for use in teaching and learning. And in some places this is easier than others, but everybody wants to move in that direction. Challenge being that educators often in such contexts don't have a generic training as educators in many instances, and we found that in our university a few years back even, our lecturers were not really trained as lecturers beyond what they'd learnt in their own educations, in their disciplines. And this is probably more so in many other African universities. And that when you start going online after you're used to working face-to-face, things start to get a little bit more complicated. And if you could operate in a fairly improvisational way face-to-face, and you try to do the same online, things get messy. So you find that probably the very best educators are able to start making that transition, but educators who are a bit shakier sometimes look really bad online. We'd started developing a workshop for our own educators about facilitating online, and realized that actually what our educators in the university probably needed was something longer than just a 2-week workshop. So there was a gap there that we needed to fill ourselves for our own purposes, as well as for any other generic needs and contexts across the continent. So we were driven from different directions. I'd seen the appeal of both of those models from different angles. And what we really needed to sort out was, how did we draw on the best elements of both models in the formulation of a new model that could be suitable as the basis for an online course, which would be an open educational resource. Fortunately, we had assistance in this process from David Shepherd, who had worked with Gilly Salmon right from the early days, and from Nancy White, both of whom were very happy to contribute expertise and review to the process. We piloted a 5-week online course for Emerge 2008 conference hosts. It had been a process of very rapid development over a period of about 5 months by the time we got there, and used that as the way of testing the model we developed. So what was this model? It's an open educational resource. It's aimed at online community facilitators in Anglophone Africa. The language of the resource is in English. We cannot claim any more at this point. It's a set of exercises intended to help develop skills in facilitation of fully online courses, mixed mode courses, online conferences, or online collaboration projects. So exercises that can be turned to multiple purposes. The resources are available to anybody who wants them, and you're free to customize them for local context. There are some license restrictions which we can look at later. And the resource consists of a downloadable course leader's guide, including all the activities from the participant's perspective and really detailed guidance for course leaders, and a specimen course site to show the basic setup of how we'd run a course site. The URL available below from our set website. We also have this link from the OER Commons site, which has generated quite a lot of traffic for the resource as well. In this 5-week course, we have activities that are both synchronous and asynchronous, because we know that in Africa, the bread and butter of online interaction currently is still asynchronous. But synchronous environments are becoming more important and more usable as bandwidth starts to become available. And what we're trying to do is to develop knowledge, skills, and attitudes about online facilitation, because what we really want is to see people learning practices of online facilitation, some awareness of the tool sets. This is not a tool-focused course. We don't go through a tour of 5 online learning environments. You work with the environment you've got to run the course in your context. And also to develop skills in designing at least small online activities. So you have people thinking about, how do you design an online activity that's going to work? It's active, it's experiential. You get there, you're in a community, you work with people in that community. If you find something interesting, you figure out why it's interesting. If something annoys you completely about what's happening in the dynamic of that community, part of your learning as an online facilitator is to figure out what it is that's annoying you and why. And there's a way in which sometimes people in these courses annoy each other. And trying to figure out why, I think, leads to some pretty valuable learning about styles of communication and facilitation. And befitting our focus on experiential learning, we want to get participants involved in learning online, an entirely online course. Sometimes learning involves an element of play and humor. And often learning in this course involves a lot of reflection. At the end of every week, there is a pause for reflection where participants get a chance to say, okay, what have I learnt this week? What's going well? Where am I struggling? What about the skills I'm supposed to have learnt this week? Where do I need to go with those? We developed our own 5-stage model. Anyone who's familiar with Gilly Salmon's model will know that there's a base there. You start off by arriving. And then you get involved in conversations, noticing that there are other people around you. And then you start to get involved in a little bit of facilitation. At the next stage, you deepen some of those facilitation skills, get involved in creation of some basic resources. And then the focus is on application, getting you ready to go out and do the work. By the end of the course, and we had debates about these objectives, and some of them may still be a little bit too ambitious, but I think we've hemmed them in sufficiently. Participants should be able to facilitate asynchronous and synchronous online discussions. They should have some knowledge of different facilitation strategies. They should know about some of the opportunities available with Web 2.0 environments and technologies. And they should be able to design short online learning activities. We don't expect people to be master facilitators at the end of the course, but we expect them to be equipped to be able to get moving and operate as facilitators. Because building expertise in this area takes more than just a course. You actually need to do a lot of facilitation and learn from that experience individually and with peers. And what does this take? Up to 10 hours a week for really enthusiastic participants. Not broadband, but a reliable internet connection. The kind of slow network connections that universities in Africa would like to have in many cases as their reliable connection. Basic software, mostly free software, and very basic technical skills.